A Roman emperor walked into a tomb in Alexandria, laid his own cloak across the glass, and stared at the body of Alexander the Great. That was around the year 215. Nobody since has been able to point to the spot. The tomb was not hidden. It sat at a main crossroads of one of the largest cities on earth, with attendants and visiting hours. Then it was gone. He is not alone. A Queen Rome wrote 2 endings for. A pharaoh in the official lists and in no tomb. 10 rulers who owned everything, and now own no ground. Number 10 is a queen the Romans buried with ceremony, and then never mentioned again. Boudica ruled the Iceni, in what is now Norfolk, and her kingdom was not a wild, tribal territory. It was a client state with a treaty. Her husband, Prasutagus, had gold torques heavy enough to bend a man's neck, chariots, and a working relationship with Rome that he treated like an insurance policy. When he died, he left a will. He named the emperor as co-heir alongside his own daughters. That was strategy. Give Rome a legal share, and Rome has a legal reason to protect the rest. The treaty protected a man, not a kingdom. Personal arrangements die with the person. Roman officials treated the will as a formality. Estates were seized. Loans local nobles thought were gifts were called in as debts. The royal family was publicly degraded, and the Roman governor was 300 miles away in Wales with the army. Boudica's coalition burned Camulodunum, Londinium, and Verulamium, 3 towns. You can still touch the result. Under modern London, beneath the traffic and the office foundations, there is a band of burnt red-orange clay where the city cooked. Archaeologists call it a destruction layer. It is the most physical thing she left behind. Then Rome came back with discipline instead of numbers, at a place Rome chose, and the revolt ended in an afternoon. 2,000 years on, the site of the Battle of Watling Street has never been identified. That matters, because the battlefield going missing is the first domino in the body going missing. Tacitus says she took poison. Cassius Dio says she fell ill and was given a costly funeral. Both were Roman, both second-hand, and neither thought the location was worth a sentence. The twist is that she was not fighting to end Roman rule. Her husband had spent his reign buying Roman protection for his daughters, in writing. The revolt started because Rome ignored a contract Rome had accepted. Technically, she was enforcing the paperwork. You may have heard she is buried under Platform 10 at King's Cross. That is a modern legend with nothing behind it. Rome kept the receipts for every town she burned. It kept no record of where it put her. Her grave vanished because the winners did not care. The next one vanished because his own people cared far too much to leave a marker. Number 9. Took Rome. Then his army made sure the world would never find him. Alaric was not a barbarian at the gates in the cartoon sense. He had been a Roman commander. He held imperial titles, negotiated grain supplies, and at one point installed his own emperor in the city. And that was his weakness. He had no land. Every deal he ever signed was for supplies, rank, and payment, not territory. His people were an army with no address, which meant any emperor could simply stop paying. So the payments stopped. Negotiations collapsed. The Goths besieged Rome for leverage, not for conquest. The court at Ravenna refused to deal. In 410, the sack happened almost by default, and for 3 days, the city that had not fallen to a foreign enemy in 800 years belonged to a man who still wanted a signed agreement more than he wanted plunder. Then he marched south toward the grain fields of Africa, the actual prize. The fleet was wrecked in a storm. He fell ill at Consentia, in Calabria, and died within months of the greatest victory of his life. Here the story stops being verifiable. According to Jordanes, writing about 140 years later, the Goths diverted the river Busento, dug a grave in the exposed riverbed, buried Alaric with treasure, then let the water back over him. And then, the account says, they killed the workers who dug it so nobody could talk. That is one late source, repeating an earlier lost one. Treat it as the story that came down to us, not as a police report. But something in it worked. Cosenza sits on that river today, and the city has backed searches for well over a century. Nothing has ever come out of the Busento but water. The strange part is what happened to his people afterward. Within a decade, the Goths were granted land in Gaul, the exact thing Alaric spent his career failing to obtain. He wanted a country. He got a riverbed, and even the riverbed is a rumor. Alaric's people hid him on purpose and wrote nothing down. The next civilization did the exact opposite. It wrote everything down, carved it in stone, filed it in triplicate, and still lost a king. Number 8 is a pharaoh who exists on the wall and nowhere else. Ramesses VIII appears in the official record of Egypt. He has a throne name and cartouches. He is in the king lists, in the sequence, in the machinery of a state that had been burying its rulers in the same valley for 400 years, with a dedicated village of workmen and a bureaucracy that logged deliveries of bread and beer for tomb crews. Egypt did not lose things. It was the most obsessively documented civilization in the ancient world. And there is no tomb for him, not a robbed one, not an emptied one, no identified burial place anywhere in the Valley of the Kings. The pressure here is not war, it is decline, working quietly. He reigned roughly a year, near the end of the 20th dynasty, when Egypt was under real economic strain and royal burials were getting smaller and cheaper. Tomb robbery had become systematic enough that the state ran investigations and kept the court papyri, which survive. The men guarding the necropolis were sometimes the men looting it. A year is not long enough to build and stock a royal tomb, so he went into something borrowed and unmarked, or somewhere nobody has looked, or a burial too modest to leave a trace. Later, priests began gathering disturbed royal mummies into hidden caches, rewrapping them, sometimes labeling them wrong. That rescue operation saved dozens of pharaohs and scrambled the paperwork for others. 2 centuries of survey work in the valley has produced unassigned tombs and unidentified bodies. None has ever been securely tied to him. What survives of him is a relief at Medinet Habu showing a procession of royal sons. He is one figure in a line of princes from before he was king. The only image we have was taken before the part of his life that mattered. Here is the irony. We only know he is missing because Egypt was so bureaucratic. A less organized civilization would have forgotten he ever existed. Egypt filed him and then lost the body. The paperwork outlived the pharaoh. In Egypt, that was supposed to be impossible. Egypt lost a king who barely reigned. Assyria lost one who ruled the entire world he knew, and lost him inside 20 years. Number 7 built the greatest library in the ancient world so that nothing would be lost. Everything in it survived. He did not. Ashurbanipal ruled Assyria at its peak. Nineveh had walls you could drive a chariot along, aqueducts bringing water from the hills, and palace reliefs of lion hunts so detailed you can count the muscles in the animals. Tribute came in from Egypt to the Persian Gulf, and he advertised something unusual for a king, that he could read cuneiform himself, handled the difficult old Sumerian texts, do the math. He collected tens of thousands of tablets and had them catalogued. The empire had a structural problem. It ran on conquest and terror, which works right up until everyone you have terrorized decides to talk to each other. It had crushed Babylon repeatedly, including in a civil war against Ashurbanipal's own brother. It had generated more enemies than it had garrisons. Its survival depended on those enemies never coordinating. They coordinated. Decades of campaigning drained manpower. Babylonian resentment hardened. The Medes consolidated in the east. When Ashurbanipal died around 631 BC, the succession fractured almost immediately. The coalition formed. Assyrian field armies were beaten one after another, and in 612 BC Nineveh was taken and destroyed. That is 19 years. From the most powerful state on earth to a mound of burnt brick, inside a single generation. Assyria did not decline. Assyria stopped. And the royal burial infrastructure went with it. The Assyrian royal crypts at Ashur were excavated and found emptied. His own resting place is unknown, and the ancient record does not even say clearly how or when he died. Here is the part that keeps me up. The fire that destroyed his palace is the reason his library survived. Clay tablets do not burn, they bake. The catastrophe hardened the archive and erased the archivist. Today you can stand in front of his tablets in the British Museum. Some of them carry the flood story that predates the Bible by centuries, the most complete surviving library of the ancient Near East, and its owner is not on any map. He built a room to make himself permanent. It worked perfectly. He just was not the part that lasted. Ashurbanipal was erased by an army. The next ruler was erased by a sentence. Number 6 is a Queen Rome wrote down twice, and the version Romans preferred is the one modern historians trust least. Zenobia ruled Palmyra, a caravan city in the Syrian desert that got rich taxing everything moving between Rome and Persia. Colonnaded streets a kilometer long, the Temple of Bel, Greek intellectuals at court. She minted coinage with her own profile and elevated her son to imperial title, which in Roman terms is not ambition, it is a declaration. Her weakness was that Palmyra's power was rented. It rose in the 260s because Rome was collapsing into crisis and Persia was unstable. Palmyra filled a vacuum. Vacuums close. Palmyrene forces expanded into Egypt and Anatolia, and the claim escalated from regional autonomy to something that looked like a rival empire. Then Rome produced one competent emperor, Aurelian, who dealt with the breakaway state in the west and then turned east. Palmyrene armies lost the field battles. The city fell in 272. A second revolt brought a harsher answer. She was captured, and then the record splits in half. One tradition in the Historia Augusta says she was paraded in Aurelian's triumph in golden chains and then retired to a villa at Tibur near modern Tivoli, where she lived comfortably and married a Roman senator. The other, in Zosimus, says she never reached Rome alive. The Historia Augusta is one of the least reliable texts to survive antiquity. It invents documents. It invents people. Historians use it the way you use a rumor from a relative who lies. And this is the twist. The comfortable retirement version was almost certainly written to make the emperor look merciful. It is the ending Rome wanted, which means the most repeated account of her life may be Roman public relations, and her disappearance began not with a soldier, but with a writer. No burial is recorded for her, not in the version where she dies on the road, not in the version where she lives in Italy for years. No confirmed inscription, no confirmed tombstone, nothing. What survives is her coinage, a woman's profile, a Roman title, minted by a state that lasted about 4 years. Rome could not decide how her story ended, so it gave her 2 and buried her in neither. Rome could not agree on how one ruler died. In the Andes, everyone knew exactly how this one died. His own people came back afterward and undid the ending. Number 5 was given a Christian burial, specifically so that he would stay in the ground. Within days, he was gone. To understand why that matters, look at what the Inca did with dead emperors. They did not bury them and move on. Royal mummies were kept, dressed, fed, consulted on decisions, carried through the streets at festivals, attended by servants who worked for a dead man's household. The previous emperors were not gone. They were still in the room, and they still owned property. That is the empire Atahualpa ruled. Roughly 10 million people, relay runners who could move a message hundreds of miles in days, storehouses stocked against famine, a state religion in which the ruler was divine. The crack was fresh and deep. The empire was in the last phase of a civil war against his own half-brother. Epidemic disease had already killed the previous emperor and wrecked the succession. On paper, the state had never been larger. In practice, it had never been more brittle. A small Spanish force was allowed to approach. At Cajamarca in 1532, they seized the emperor in an ambush that took minutes and decided a continent. Then came the ransom. Gold and silver, brought in from across the empire to fill a room. And the ransom did something Pizarro could not have arranged himself. It proved the entire administrative machine of the Inca state would obey orders relayed through his captors. Once that was proven, paying the ransom removed the reason to keep him alive. He was executed in 1533 after being baptized. And the baptism was not sentiment. It changed the method of death, and it guaranteed a Christian burial in a church. That was the point. A Christian grave meant no mummification, no ancestor cult, no dressed body carried through Cusco at festival time, no object for an empire to rally around. The Spanish understood the theology they were attacking, and they attacked it precisely. It did not hold. Spanish chronicle accounts report that within days, his followers removed the body from the church, reportedly to carry it north toward Quito. It has never been found. Separately, decades later, Spanish officials under Polo de Ondegardo confiscated the surviving royal mummies of earlier emperors and shipped them to Lima, where they were eventually buried at a hospital. A search of that site in 2001 found no royal mummies. Different thread, same ending. What is left at Cajamarca is a room with a line on the wall marking a height of gold that was paid, melted, stamped, and shipped to Europe. An empire that kept its dead emperors in the room lost the only one that mattered. The Inca hid a body from an empire. In Egypt, an empire hid a body from history and may have hidden it so well that we have been staring at it. Number 4 has the most famous face in the ancient world and no body attached to it. The bust of Nefertiti sits in Berlin behind glass. Painted limestone, one eye inlay missing, unfinished on one side. It is copied more than almost any object from antiquity. And here is what nobody tells you. It was never a monument. It was found in a sculptor's workshop at Amarna. It is a studio model, the ancient equivalent of a mannequin head in a back room. That is the most complete thing we have of her. In life, she was enormous. Great royal wife at the peak of the new kingdom, depicted at the same scale as the king, sometimes in poses reserved for pharaohs. A new capital built from nothing in the desert at Amarna, temples to a single god with her at the center of the rituals. There is serious argument that she ruled in her own right at the end, under another name. The weakness was that all of it rested on a religious revolution with a constituency of roughly one family. The old priesthoods were not converted, they were dispossessed, and they waited. Akhenaten died. The new capital was abandoned within a few years. The court went back to Thebes, the old religion was restored, and then came the part that makes this one different. The erasure was not a raid, it was a policy. Amarna names were chiseled off monuments. The kings of that period were cut out of the official king lists. Later dynasties treated the whole episode as something that had not happened. She disappears from the record before the record itself was edited, which means we do not know if she died, was renamed, or ruled under a different name entirely. The royal tomb at Amarna was cut and prepared. There is no confirmed burial for her in it. An unidentified mummy from KV-35, the younger lady, was linked by DNA work published in 2010 to Tutankhamun's parentage. The mainstream reading is that she was a sister of Akhenaten, not Nefertiti. It remains disputed. In 2015, a hypothesis proposed that she lies behind a sealed wall in Tutankhamun's tomb. Radar surveys followed. They did not confirm it. Here is the twist that makes this one sit badly. She may not be missing at all. She may be lying in a museum right now, in a case under a label that says unidentified, because the erasure campaign removed the name that would let anyone match the face to the body. We know exactly what she looked like. We have no idea which body it belonged to. Nefertiti's location is unknown. The next queen's location was written down, published, and visited for centuries. That turned out not to help. Number 3 is the only ruler on this list whose grave has a recorded address. Plutarch tells us where Cleopatra was buried, in her own monument near a temple of Isis in the royal quarter of Alexandria, with Mark Antony. That is not a mystery. That is a street address. The problem is that the street is under about 6 meters of seawater. Her world was the last act of a Greek-speaking Macedonian dynasty that had held Egypt for 3 centuries. The royal quarter was palaces, a working harbor, the library, and a lighthouse you could see from far out at sea. Her profile circulated on coins from Egypt into Syria. Her monument was under construction while she was still alive. The weakness underneath was simple and had been there for generations. Egyptian independence was a Roman decision, not a fact. The Ptolemies survived because Rome found them more convenient than annexation. That calculation was always one civil war away from changing. She bet the kingdom on one side of a Roman civil war and lost at Actium in 31 BC. The fleet and army defected. Alexandria fell. She was captured alive, which made her the most valuable prop in a triumph Octavian was already planning, and she died in 30 BC before he could stage it. Octavian permitted the burial. He allowed her monument to stand and allowed Antony to be placed with her. Read that again. The last thing the last pharaoh of Egypt received was permission, and then the ground took it. Alexandria's royal quarter subsided over the following centuries through earthquakes and coastal collapse. Marine archaeologists have mapped it. Column drums, paving, statue fragments, and harbor works lie on the seabed of the eastern harbor. The district still exists. It is unreachable in the way that matters. Since 2005, excavations at Taposiris Magna, west of the city, have produced tunnels, coins, burials, and periodic headlines. No tomb. Most Egyptologists remain skeptical of the site. This is the only entry on this list defeated by geology instead of by people. Nobody looted her. Nobody concealed her. Rome left the monument standing. The coastline did not. Everyone knows the address. Nobody can get to the door. Cleopatra's grave was lost by accident. Number 2 is missing on purpose, by design, and it is still being protected today by people who would rather it stayed lost. Every other ruler on this list is missing because something went wrong. Genghis Khan is missing because it worked. Consider what he had when he died in 1227, the largest contiguous land empire ever assembled inside one lifetime. A written law code, a relay post system running messages across continents, cities that surrendered on the strength of the name alone, and a structural problem his family understood perfectly. Steppe empires were heritable property, divided among sons. Unity had a shelf life, and everyone knew it. A visible tomb would have become a rallying point in the succession fight that was certain to follow. So the burial was engineered. He died on campaign, and the death was reportedly concealed until the campaign was finished. The body was moved home under escort and buried somewhere in the Khenti Mountains, in the region associated with Burken Khaldun. The area was closed. A hereditary community, the Darkhad, was assigned to guard it. Then the extraordinary part. That closure held for roughly 8 centuries. Through Mongol rule, Qing rule, and the Soviet period, the restricted zone known as the Ich Korig stayed restricted. Different governments, different centuries, different ideologies. Same answer. Nobody goes in. The later chroniclers, Rashid al-Din and Marco Polo among them, added the detail that the funeral escort was killed to protect the location and that horses trampled the ground flat. Treat that as tradition rather than fact. But whatever was actually done, the outcome is not in dispute. There is no decisive rupture in this story. That is the story. No sack, no flood, no purge. Just a decision, executed properly, then defended by institutions for 800 years. Modern attempts have failed in sequence. A Japanese and Mongolian survey in the 1990s. A foreign-led expedition in 2001 that triggered a national backlash over disturbing sacred ground. A satellite imagery crowdsourcing project in 2010. Nothing. Meanwhile, there is a mausoleum in Inner Mongolia carrying his name, receiving crowds every year. It is a cenotaph. It contains no body, and it never did. The most visited grave associated with him is a stage set, and a great many Mongolians do not want the real one found. That is not superstition standing in the way of science. That is the last order still being obeyed. He did not lose his grave. He spent his final months winning it. Genghis Khan vanished because an empire made sure of it. The last man on this list vanished even though an empire spent 600 years showing him off. Number 1 you could go and look at. That is what makes it unbearable. For roughly 6 centuries, the body of Alexander the Great was a public attraction, in the middle of a working city, and Roman emperors treated a visit as a scheduled stop. Start with the funeral, because the funeral was the point. He died in Babylon in 323 BC at 32. His body was placed in a gold sarcophagus and mounted on a wheeled carriage built like a small temple, which took around 2 years to build. Roads were cleared and repaired ahead of it. Crowds turned out along the route. It was not a funeral procession, it was a moving monument. And then Ptolemy hijacked it. He diverted the cortege to Egypt, first to Memphis, then to Alexandria, because whoever physically possessed Alexander held the strongest legitimacy claim in the ancient world. That is the hidden weakness here, and it is a strange one. The body was never a memorial, it was political property, and property gets liquidated. A later Ptolemy, short of money, melted down the gold sarcophagus to pay troops and replaced it with a transparent one. His successor kings ran out. Egypt became Roman, and the tomb, the Soma, stopped being a legitimacy machine and became something less dangerous, a landmark. Julius Caesar came, Augustus came, left flowers, and reportedly damaged the nose. Caligula took the breastplate, and around 215, Caracalla, who idolized him to the point of imitation, came and laid his cloak and his ring on the case. That is the last securely attested visit in all of recorded history. Nobody in that room knew they were closing the exhibit. After that, the pressure is ordinary and slow. Alexandria took serious damage in 3rd century civil violence and imperial reprisals. Christianity became the state religion, which turned a pagan god-king shrine from a destination into an embarrassment. Earthquake and tsunami damage in the 4th century reshaped the waterfront, and the street plan changed. The visits stopped being recorded, and then the location stopped being known. There is no rupture. No one destroyed it on a specific afternoon. It was visited less, mentioned less, and eventually not at all. The most famous tomb in the world was lost to attention. There have been dozens of documented modern searches, digs under mosques, streets, cisterns, and church foundations. The Nabi Daniel tradition is a theory, not a finding. Every few years a headline claims a lead. None has produced the tomb. Alexandria's ancient street level lies beneath a dense living city with a high water table, which makes large-scale excavation not expensive, but impossible. Here is what the whole list has been building toward. Genghis Khan disappeared because an empire spent centuries making certain of it. Alexander disappeared despite an empire that spent centuries advertising him. Concealment and publicity produced identical results, which means none of these graves were lost because of what was done to them. They were lost because nothing lasts long enough to keep a promise about permanence. 10 absences. A battlefield nobody can locate, a riverbed with a legend in it and nothing else. A pharaoh in the king lists and in no tomb. A library with no librarian. A queen with 2 endings and no grave in either. An emperor his own people came back and took. A face in Berlin with no body. An address underwater. A forbidden zone still guarded. A crossroads in a living city, and every one of them built something to outlast memory. The library survived. The bust survived. The coins survived. The burnt layer under London survived. The ransom room survived. The empty mausoleum survived and still sells tickets. The object lasted. The person did not. Every time. Somewhere in Alexandria, under an apartment block or a road or the harbor silt, is the last thing Caracalla ever looked at. He put his cloak over the case and went home. There was no ceremony, no closing, no announcement. Somebody was simply the last person to look at Alexander the Great, and then people stopped coming. They spent everything they had on not being forgotten. What is left of them fits in a glass case, and the case has somebody else's name on it.